Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachel Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
We are undoubtedly living in a day that is full of insane conflict and just contentiousness and anger and division. And no one better to engage this wild day with than my dear friend, colleague, and boss, Cathy Loerzel. Cathy, welcome. You are the Executive Vice President of the Allender Center at the Seattle School. It's quite a long title, but also very impressive. So welcome. And are you ready to have conflict?
I am. I'm always ready, Dan. Thanks for asking.
Well, how should we step into the conflict of our era, into our personal conflict, and into all the conflicts you happen to run into, certainly as a leader? So we've got a lot to address, but tell me, what do you know about conflict?
I wish I could say I don't know very much, but I know quite a bit about conflict. It seems to be part of what I eat, breathe, and deal with on a daily basis. You'd think being in quarantine for almost a year, I would have less conflict because I just don't have as many people I'm dealing with outside of my home. But indeed, that is not true. It turns out conflict is alive and well on Zoom as it is in the classroom. So,
let's just say we cannot live in an era quite as intensely bound to conflict. And from my standpoint, the three words that keep coming back to mind when I think about the reality of conflict is it just seems so petty and loud and shrill. And I don't know if those words ring at all true to you, but I'm looking at my own conflict with Becky. I'm looking at conflict with friends and what I see surrounding and inhabiting a great portion of our world. Those words feel very, very true. I'm just curious what you do with them.
Yeah, they feel true to me as well. And I think what I'm learning as I've been removed from being in more of an external environment, that I'm having more space alone to deal with my own conflict. And so I'm actually starting to see the underbelly of petty, loud, and shrill in a different way than I would have if I had to continue to be in an external environment. And I think the way that's playing out for me is by being more aware of my underlying fear. And then how that plays out in terms of when I feel petty or when I feel defended or when I feel more fearful, it becomes louder. When I feel like I'm dealing with loss, it feels more shrill-like. So it's been an interesting process to gain more access to the underbelly of my structures of conflict.
Well, and we'll go there in but a moment. But one of the points of conflict or fights that I had with Becky today was I have a bowl that I'm utilizing similarly to the clothes that I wear. I don't tend to have to change my clothes a lot. I'm not in public, and generally, a t-shirt and a sweatshirt is enough. And I have a bowl. I have one bowl that I have my soup in, I have my oatmeal in, and it wasn't where I thought it was. And I just sort of shrilly and loudly over something as petty as, like, where did you move my bowl? Well, the worst part of this whole story is I'd put a bunch of papers in the context of the bowl and it covered it. And she's like, the bowl's right in front of you. I couldn't see it. She knew where it was. And in the middle of this egregious interaction, I'm not going to say the words I spoke, but I lost it. And I'm going, what is going on? For me, that the mere absence of a bowl where I think it's going to be, that I'm using again and again because I think somehow that's a good use of space and time, has erupted into an interaction that really is ugly. So I would love for you to take me into either my story or what you're seeing with regard to your own, as to whether these things are normal or whether I may be, which I think I may be, one of the least mature of God's creation. But what are you seeing?
Well, I'm curious of how that engagement would have been different a year ago than it is now.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't be using the same bowl.
Right.
I wouldn't feel like I need to preserve the universe out of the chaos it's in by not having too many bowls in the. It's crazy. I even talking about it just feels like, oh, good God, are you making this up? But no,
it's real. It's real. And I think that's a good premise to start with. We're all losing our minds to some degree at this point. And how that plays out, nobody knows. It's different for everyone. And for those of you who are living in a part of the world or the country where you feel like your world has gone back to normal during the COVID era, bless your soul. That's fine. That is not the world we live in right now. That's not the world that Dan and I live in Seattle.
Oh, it's not the world anybody lives in. So if you actually think that you're coming back to normal, we have another podcast for you. It's on delusion.
Yes, but I was just talking to someone who was like, yeah, we went bowling the other day. And I was like, bowling? Are you serious? Like, you put your hand into a thing that other people held their hand into, like put your shoes. Anyways, it was baffling to me. That's beside the point. But there is something to what we're living in that is fraying the edges of what we have known to be normal, and the normal things that we have to even us out, at least for me, are no longer available to me. And so it's made conflict become a whole different thing. Like, Dan, a bowl. I mean, we all have our bowls, and we're at this place where, because the world seems to be closing in on us just a little bit more, the oddest things set me off. And I can't describe, like, I don't know when they're coming. I don't know what my reaction will be. And the other day we were in meetings, and all of a sudden my internet started to go out and my computer started to kind of fritz. And it was enough for me to almost turn it off and just be like, I'm going back to bed. I cannot handle the fact that my computer is failing me right now. And immediately, what do? I call my husband, because clearly anything with the computer that he bought for us,
it's his fault.
It's his fault. So I'm yelling, shrilling at the top of my lungs. Well, what is happening with the computer? Why is it doing this? I thought you fixed this. And he's like, coming in. I mean, it's like coming into a war zone at that point. He has no idea how I'm going to be. And I'm like, I'm ready to kill. And it's a bizarre space, because literally 10 minutes before that, I felt calm. I felt fine. I felt okay. Like I could manage my life. And then all of a sudden, everything got turned upside down, and I'm undone and ready to blame someone else. And then also ready to just crawl into my bed, put the covers over my head and say, I'm done. I can't do it. So I think, and there's something about that I'm grateful for, because it's exposing something that was always there. It's just been exacerbated because of the period we're living in. So I think there's a lot to learn about how we handle conflict, what happens in us that's more raw, we're more vulnerable, we're more on edge. And I think if we can actually take the opportunity to learn from what they're telling us, there's actually a lot of opportunity. There's possibility and hope. But man, is it hard to recognize it when it comes.
If I can put it as bluntly as this, it's only hopeful if what you really want is for your soul and your being to become more like Jesus. Mm-hmm. If you really just want less conflict or less struggle, this is not going to be a good era for you, because the things that were there, yes, I can be petty and loud and shrill, but the reality is it's even more so in a highly traumatized, environment, world, situation where I'm actually seeing what's there, but seeing it more in drama and in a way that's just frightfully more clear. For me, I've gone back again and again to this section of scripture, James chapter 4, because James is addressing the question. Verse 1, what causes fights and quarrels among you? I don't think he was actually likely thinking about an adult man flipping out over a bowl that's being hidden by the papers he put there, but he might actually include that. And he says, don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but do not have. So you kill, you covet, but you cannot get what you want. So you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. That has been a container for me in the midst of heightened conflict with Becky, heightened conflict in the context of our work at the Allender Center, just heightened conflict around me, and to be able to go, oh, what's going on? Mm-hmm. So I at least want to spend a bit of time talking about those categories, that we've got desires that are waging war within us, and we fail to ask. But when we do ask, we don't receive, because the purpose for what we're asking for would actually end up killing us if we were to receive from God what we're demanding. So at least to step back, what are you encountering with regard to the reality of desire and the war? Because you used the word a moment ago, kill. So, mm-hmm. I mean, you're pretty darn close to what James is talking about.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, there's been a long war with desire in and of itself. I've set my world up over a long period of time so that I'm always moving. And I'm going from one part of my list to the next, to drop off for kids, to making sure that everyone's fed and have clean clothes. Like, there's an order and like a pressure to the world. That's always been part of the structure of my life. And that's kept me from actually having to link into what I truly desire. And so my desire ends up going underground. And I think when desire goes underground, it becomes demand. And I would even say in that James passage, there's a sense of I think connecting to our true tender desires is very different than connecting to the demand of like, I'm not getting what I want. Right. And so I think when desire isn't actually connected to or tended to in those small ways, it moves quickly into demand. And then you're demanding someone else to meet that desire for you. And when it doesn't happen, you're furious.
Well,
right.
Yeah. I mean, but what are you saying about the struggle with desire at the core?
Yeah, I think desire brings with it a lot of vulnerability. And when we're really clear and connected to our desire, it means we need things from other people, from God, from ourselves. We need care, we need attunement, we need containment, like we need all those things. And those are places that we have not often been cared for well by other people.
Well, I just want to scream. Desire sounds so good, but when you say that truly every desire opens up really a heart of desperation.
Yeah.
It isn't minor when we begin to say, I'd really like a break from this crazy era. When you really name desire at its deepest level, you're going to open up realms of vulnerability that inevitably open up the question of, will we ever have anything normal again? Will there ever be a release from the permutations of COVID? Will there ever be a return to being in our offices together. I mean, the moment we begin to open desire, we open up a cornucopia of questions and doubts and struggles that really are tied to that issue of, I don't want to desire. I do desire. I can't help but desire, but it puts me in conflict with myself, let alone almost inevitably with you, because our desires will never be equivalent. They'll never be equal at the same level for the same thing, whether it be in marriage or friendships or, frankly, anywhere.
Well, I think when we really clip into what's true about our desire, what we truly long for, it brings us back to the fact that we are created for Eden, and it brings us back to the sense of what do we do with just how beautiful and how broken the world is, and so ultimately to truly link to our desire also means bringing us to the inevitable space of grief.
Yeah.
And most of us just want to avoid grief because it's too painful. We haven't had good people who can bring us into grief and actually allow us to weep and to mourn the loss, but also bring us back into hope. It's a tricky space that most of us have not had good experiences in, so we avoid it.
Yeah. Well, we're right back into when we deal with the past with regard to desire, we're in the realm of regret. When we deal with desire in the realm of the future, we're in the realm of worry. But the reality is there's this constant gnawing of loss in the present. So between regret, worry, and loss, why in the name of God do I want to engage desire other than to trivialize it and make it ultimately very material, or far more effectively, just kill desire or kill those who disrupt my desire? And in that sense, we're in this important category of what James is inviting us to engage. And that is, we covet deeply enough that we envy others whom we perceive to have what it is that we both need and demand. But also, when we don't get what we want, there is a violence that, again, I just look at what happened this morning and go, I just spoke words to my wife, who I love more than anyone on the earth, and I treated her so poorly over something so petty, and there's damage. She is a deeply kind and forgiving woman, but I hurt her. And that doesn't just get erased because she knows my intentions are not harmful. And yet what I did was wicked. So when we begin to address this killing and coveting, James is pretty clear. We're talking about a war. There will be war between you and every human being where desire opens disappointment, some degree of division. And in that, you're going to have to engage the reality that it's much easier not to ask. And so we get to that second premise. We don't ask for what it is that will open our heart to all the realities that we're naming. Where does that show up for you, where you fail to ask?
Yeah, this has been a deep conversation between me and my husband. Because when I get into the realm of what I truly desire, I actually freeze, and I lose. So I'll bring you into a story. Like I've been doing a lot of conferences and a lot of teaching, and have known I've needed to rest and I needed space to recover. Had a Saturday, and he was like, "Well, you have the Saturday off. What do you need?" And I'm looking at him, and it's literally like my whole body went blank. And he's like, "So, and he kind of looks at me and then loses interest a little bit because I've frozen. And then is like, well, listen, I'm going to go down to my office and, pack this thing up and then also get a haircut. Is that okay? And then I'll be back in a few hours. And so, I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. And so now he's gone, and now I realize I've lost my window, because by the time he gets back, it's going to be the end of the day. I'm now going to be cooking dinner, and we're then going to be into getting the kids down for bedtime and bath time and all that stuff. And so now inside, I'm like, I had a minute where I could have maybe connected to a desire or a need and asked for what I needed. Couldn't do it. Needed more time. Everything shut down in me, and now the window has closed, and now I'm back into despair. And so I tell that story because it's tricky for some of us to really even understand how to ask or what we're asking for. And I think, but even in that setup between the two of us, he's giving me space, but it collapses pretty quickly. And then I'm left to go back to my old kind of patterns. And then I can be mad at him for not giving me space to figure out what I need. Right.
We'll talk about this in a little bit later, but when we did this marriage conference on conflict and connection, the reality is every couple has a dance for how they deal with conflict, or another way of putting it, how conflict keeps them from engaging desire. And for you, it's hard to ask. It's not hard for me to ask, but so seldom do I ask for really what I want.
Mm. What do you ask for?
I ask for the opportunity to go read.
And that's not what you want.
Well, I think it is kind of what I want. But in those moments where I just want space, I just want to be left alone, I actually am wanting to be left alone because I don't want to have to tend to the turmoil, the noise that's happening inside of me. And Becky's come to learn that many times when I isolate, when I say I want to isolate, the reality is I actually want to engage what's causing me to isolate. So, there are people who don't ask, period. You've put yourself far more in that. There are others like me who seem very facile in being able to articulate what they want. But a lot of times what I want isn't really what I want. So this whole issue of we don't ask, much like the older brother in Luke 15, he refuses to ask his father for the fatted calf. And it is such a priceless, heartbreaking, but beautiful engagement of the father, inviting the son to ask. So dangerous. And therefore, when we do ask, as that James passage invites us to engage, we often ask for something that, if we were to get it, would actually do us harm. So we ask with wrong motive. I don't think what God is doing in this passage is saying, you should only want me. Everything else is illegitimate. Your deepest desire is for me. Just ask for me. I think we can legitimately ask for a day at the spa, time to read a book, or just help in cutting up vegetables. But the reality is, so often what we do ask is out of the idolatry that is so severely bound to our own sense of shame, to our demands to actually be full without really acknowledging what our hearts were meant for. So what I hear in that portion of the passage is, God doesn't give us what we often demand, not because he is stingy, but because he's so gracious to not give us what would in turn bring us and other people harm. But it just puts us in this large category of, my God, already we've said, why can't you just guys get along? Why can't you just be simple and clear, ask for what you need, be able to say yes, and so on and so forth? So when you think about your dance and the orientation you and Will have to conflict, how would you describe it?
I think, gosh, that's how I describe it. I think oftentimes for us, conflict comes in hot. Um, uh, and it's a sense of we're both waiting for the other person to fail. We're both I'm waiting for him to fail me. He's waiting for me to fail him. And so you go in tentatively and you go in expecting it not to go well. And man, oh man, is that a setup. And so oftentimes it won't go well. One of us is triggered. We fall back into our old patterns, our normal ruts of how he is in a fight, how I am in a fight. We both feel vindicated by how the other person has treated us. And then we go back to our corners.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, and you both come in hot.
Yeah.
So hot, but in some ways setting each other up, demanding the other fail,
right,
but willing to fail by coming in hot, and eventually you both fail.
Yeah, that's nice.
We're a little different.
How are you guys?
I come in hot, and Becky comes in cool. Mm-hmm. And again, oftentimes in marriage, you've got one person who's sort of the obvious bad guy, and the other who's so often so much better. But often what's under the better is a level of unwillingness to engage. So Becky will stonewall, and I'll just come apart at the seams. Mm-hmm. And eventually, when I've spun myself like a dervish and I'm exhausted, she'll then finally speak. But it's really about where we both find safety. Mm-hmm. My world when I grew up, the intensity of arguing, fighting was the place of safety in an interaction with a mentally ill mother. For her, safety was in keeping her mouth shut, because if she opened it, she would get devoured by two very angry parents. So safety, as crazy as it may be, I find safety in conflict. She finds safety when she escapes it. But often what occurs is we create these DMZs, these demilitarized zones, where we kind of know that if we talk about X, Y, or Z, we're going to be in a level of conflict that we don't want to be in. And so we do conflict avoidance. So I may come in hot, but there are a lot of things I avoid, a lot of things she avoids, and which, from my standpoint, that ground, the DMZ, becomes the soil evil uses to, in one sense, plant seeds of disappointment and despair and ultimately division. So after 44 years, we've got enough areas where we've just not had the courage to engage at least 20 years ago, 10 years ago, that we're engaging. And like plenty of times, those are contexts where when you've not addressed something, a lot of pent-up explosions occur that really express that sense of failure and grief and anger that's just been stored over. So avoidance to explosion would be more our style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we go right in.
Well, a bit like sumo wrestlers.
A bit.
So again, the question that I think needs to be posed before we end is, are you aware with the people that you relate to, spouse, partner, friends, work associates, you are in a dance, and it's a dance that is a struggle, a war with desire. And that dance may be deeply different, as Cathy's and mine seem to be. But the bottom line is, it's still a war with desire. It's still a refusal to ask. And often it's asking without God providing, because of the reality of our own demand and idolatry. So what we want to engage is what needs to happen for us to truly do better? And we'll start that next week. Well, we had a significant conversation with a bunch of folks about marriage and conflict. And how was your conflict with Will after we did the conference?
I left the house immediately and went alone by myself for 2 days. It was great.
That's hilarious. I literally escaped from Becky for a couple hours, but honestly, I think we were both more tender. She listened to the material, loved what we were engaging, and just said, there are a couple things that as a result of what I heard, we need to step into. And I felt this moment of going, no, 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 no. But it was really, I mean, she took notes, which is really weird to have your wife take notes about your own conference. But we used those notes to begin the process of engaging the things that she wanted to address. So look, we want to tell you that this event we hosted on February 6th, which we called Conflict to Connection. It really is a conference for couples, but beyond couples. And if you missed it, you can still access the recording if you register by April 6th. So you can go to theallendercenter.org/marriage for details if you want to learn more about dealing with conflict.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.